Welcome back, everybody. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Magnetic Podcast. Today, super excited to have Lucas D from Darkroom Agency, CEO. Lucas, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate you, and we're excited to kind of dig into all things agency and all things e-commerce today.
Yeah, Jared, thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and yeah, excited to chat.
So to kick things off, why don't you just tell us a little bit about what you're doing at Darkroom Agency and kind of what led you here today?
Yeah, so we are a growth strategy agency based here in New York City. We have offices globally. We focus on growing B2C businesses for the most part. We do that through a combination of strategy, a proprietary data toolkit that we've built out, and then a suite of marketing execution services that span new customer acquisition, retention, creative, and then some digital product services as well. It's been 6 years working on this business. On the agency side, we're doing a bunch as far as professional services concerned. And it's just been a grind growing the business, expanding into other services. And then we're launching our university, I was telling you before, next month. So we're really excited about that.
Yeah, and I think one of the most interesting things is that you guys have taken an approach from an agency angle of sort of more of a holistic, and correct me if I'm wrong, but sort of taking a holistic view at growth and saying, hey, here's all the pieces of that, and here's how we can help kind of drive that. How have you guys, is that true, A, and how have you guys thought about sort of the agency model as it exists today and how you kind of differentiate?
So people come to agencies because they want specialization. They're trying to outsource expertise, or they're trying to outsource execution. That's how I think about it. You want human capital, and you want it to execute and relatively quickly. So a lot of what we talk about at the agency is like time to value. How quickly are we delivering value to the client? So there's a whole operational side of the agency world that's really complex. You need to be organized, and you need to be good at delivering client services. The reason why we take a really broad view working with the client, like we want to own more of the growth pie, is because we do it really well. And we start with basically like data consulting. So a lot of brands come to us and they've had successful growth based on what I call like the gut instinct of the marketer. They understand they have product market fit, and they understand how to distribute the product at scale in some way. And then over time, you end up gathering so much customer data that is a really rich data source that you can use to improve your business and unlock the next stage of growth, whatever that might be. And so when we start a relationship, we try and mine and understand that data. It helps inform how marketing strategies should evolve. It helps inform how we should merchandise or develop new products. And for me, that's the purpose of marketing. It's being the tip of the spear in communicating with your customers. And it's being able to leverage that to continue to iterate. So, what we found is that it's great to understand a lot of this data. Companies are usually very surprised by the things that we uncover. It's highly valuable for them. But then leveraging that data and figuring out how it needs to change and integrate into forward-looking marketing strategies, marketing tactics, whatever it might be, that's really difficult. And that's where marketing execution services come in handy. And what I've been trying to do is figure out how we can provide those services in the most efficient way, and provide time and cost efficiencies to our clients on the execution side. So I think of Darkroom like a hub and spoke model. We start with this data strategy service. It's highly valuable. And then depending on how we need to execute on strategy and work with our clients, depending on their internal resources, we build custom teams for them. That's kind of how I think about it.
Yeah, I think during my time at Klaviyo, actually, data was always something that came up as like, hey, we want more of it as a brand. But then when it came to actually like watching these businesses do something with that data, that was always sort of the missing piece. So it's really cool to see that you guys have prioritized, hey, like we understand data is important, but at the end of the day, if you're not using it to grow, to learn, right, then what's the point? And I think that's really where brands are kind of missing the mark when it comes to whether it's first party data or any data in general.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you on that. Klaviyo's done some great stuff with like, being able to leverage some of these predictive analytics in a better way. Um, yeah, I think that's becoming more a part of the equation. It's like it because I mean, I talk about privacy a lot because of the way that it's affecting consumer tracking and the effectiveness of advertising. But like if you really want to be good as a business and as an advertiser, you need to understand your existing customers, and how to acquire your better customers or your best cohort of customers. The only way to do that is to leverage your existing data to understand the behavioral characteristics of those customers, and then figure out how to acquire more of them. So that's an exercise in understanding data and then making improvements based on that.
Yeah, I guess that kind of almost leads me into a thought around the fact that data is becoming harder and harder to collect. Just, let's get into the meat of it. GDPR, data privacy rules, Apple changing iOS guidelines to make it harder to tell if emails are being opened. As a agency that lives on or starts kind of your initial model is, hey, let's look at the data, let's consult on it. How do you help brands, understand or navigate and get data in when it's becoming increasingly harder to do that?
Yeah, I mean, the first step is just understanding their infrastructure. If you have brands like in the Shopify ecosystem, a lot of like Shopify, Klaviyo, Triple Whale, like any sort of brand that's playing in that ecosystem, usually data is really easy to clean. It's already been cleaned, it's structured, and like we can create visualizations and analyses for our clients relatively quickly, like out of the box. For brands that are more complicated, they have retail locations, they have POS, they have different sort of systems. It's a heavier lift. Those are really fun projects though. But I mean, at its very simplest, let's take like CLV, for instance, customer lifetime value. It's one of the most important metrics in determining the value of a company. All you need to do to understand probabilistic CLV and like to build a model around that is to have a CSV, a time series CSV with sales data and with unique identifiers for each of your customers. You can get that all out of the box with Shopify. And you can get that with most other businesses too, depending on their infrastructure. Where things get a little bit hazy is like when you're working in marketplaces like Amazon or Walmart.com, and there's more there are more protections around customer data that kind of create a veil and a mask in terms of like how you can properly discern what's where and why sales are happening. So it depends on the infrastructure of the company and what their major sales channels are. But yeah, when you look at measuring the effectiveness of advertising and where that's moving, really just having time series sales data from your sales channels is enough to build models.
Yeah, I think starting with what you have, going from there, and I mean, sales data from sales channels sounds like something everybody would have. So that's definitely interesting insight. I want to ask you, because I know a lot of people that are listening to this, they don't have the exposure to brands that you guys do as an agency. I'm sure you work with hundreds of brands every year. How would you describe how like e-commerce has changed in the last 3 years?
I think there's some major market movements that are happening. So COVID is like, when you look at that for most of the brands, so a lot of what we look at the agency are these like C3s, customer cohort charts, and they basically document the rate of acquisition and retention over a multi-year time horizon. These are like the most powerful charts to view when you're assessing the health of a company, because you can see what their growth trajectory is and how it's basically transpired on a quarter over quarter basis. Most businesses that I'm seeing now, they had like these crazy growth spurts on e-com during COVID because people were obviously shopping from home. And COVID, there's and since that time, there's been a market drop off in sales. Not for all businesses. There's some businesses that are just, they're scaling like crazy. Brands like Armra, Brunt Workwear, Happy Mammoth, some brands that we've worked with and have seen that have just like, they still enjoy continued success, and that's because of the way that they're deploying dollars. But I'm talking about legacy businesses. By and large, you see a relative decline in sales because consumer behavior is shifting back towards buying in store. And I think there's a confluence of factors going into that. One, consumer tracking, iOS 14, so ATT changes on platform. The general progression with consumer tracking is going towards a world where both the legislation and the privacy platforms like Apple want to get to a place where advertisers cannot track the consumers that they're trying to market to. So that's by and large decreasing the effectiveness of advertising. So that's a negative force that's putting downward pressure on the effectiveness of advertising. I think you're also seeing a shift towards community-based marketing. So I think a lot of the brands that are fast growing now, they're using the term community. We have just an incredible community. I just led a talk at Shopify with this, and you kind of ask yourself, like, what is community? What does that even mean? Like, how do we quantify the strength of a community? I was talking to Kevin from Emmy Eats, and he was like, we don't quantify it. Like, we just have a great community, and we communicate with them. And when we open up in a new store, they buy all of the Emmy, and we sell out immediately. I'm like, well, that's a metric to track right there. But I think community is just another word for like how effective your marketing is, and like how personal you're getting with it, and how you're creating a sense of loyalty around the brand. And there are tried and true ways of tracking that and understanding the efficacy of it. So I think there's a shift towards community. So it's not just like a performance marketing game, but you need to understand how to mix organic into the equation, and to, be really thoughtful about how you're communicating on your own channels. And then there's a huge move towards marketplace. I think we're seeing a great consolidation right now because of point one being consumer tracking changing in the way that it is. But the move is towards closed loop ecosystems where you still have deterministic attribution, meaning I'm spending $1 on this platform, I know I'm going to get $5 in return. And so Amazon is becoming hugely popular for direct-to-consumer brands who, their margin profile isn't as attractive as it once was on the D2C channels because of saturation, because of consumer tracking changes that I just mentioned, because of community, all these things. So they're moving to closed-loop ecosystems where they have perfect one-to-one tracking. It's Amazon, other sorts of retail media, largely like PPC-based channels. And so I think that's what kind of the consumer wants too. The consumer is getting inundated with different sort of businesses, and they want single destinations to shop at. So there's always been a pendulum swinging between the leverage that the brand and the retailer or the marketplace has. This has always been a thing in consumer branding. You're starting to see it shift in the other direction towards marketplace today because of what's happened on the direct side, and all these other things that I've mentioned.
That's really interesting. I feel like those 2 points in some ways can be counteracting in a way, because when I think of building community, I almost think of the necessity of having direct relationships. But then you combine that with the fact that customers are wanting more marketplace aggregated experiences. How do you navigate those two things? Because to me, they seem like they might go against each other. Maybe you would disagree.
I think before, 3 years ago, even 2 years ago, you'd be like, that's an Amazon product. It's like commoditized and doesn't have a lot of brand differentiation, and that's that. I think today that's changing because Amazon is making the platform a lot more friendly for brands. Chanel just listed on Amazon. Like, let's just stop here. Actually, let's play that out. Chanel, a luxury fashion house, been in business for decades, starts listing and selling products on Amazon. And all of a sudden you have other luxury brands starting to sell on the platform and the marketplace too. The consumer has so many options now when they shop on that platform that they're switching costs from one brand to the next brand. They become so low. So like switching costs are important to contextualize because they directly affect how loyal a customer is to a brand. Like when we talk about community, it's like loyalty, right? And that directly has to do with my switching costs. If I'm loyal to Erno and I don't buy Save the Duck, it's directly related to how easily accessible that product Save the Duck is to me during my buying experience. I'll play that out for you so it's clear for everyone. All right, so I'm looking at this jacket. It's like, for argument's sake, $500, right? And I'm on Amazon, and the recommended products, because I'm shopping on that platform, show me the exact same product from Save the Duck, and it's $100 cheaper. The reviews are better, and it's sustainable, meaning there were no ducks killed in the process. I was just sitting at Save the Duck last night, so this example is really fresh for me. The marketplace is actually reducing the switching costs for the consumer, and they're eroding brand loyalty. They're making it more, they're making it too easy for customers to be able to switch. So this increases competition, and it erodes profits for some of these consumer brands. And that's what's happening, right? So on the own direct to consumer channel, e-commerce, you have advertising costs that are increasing because ads are less effective. So that's putting margin pressure on them, where they have an own channel where they can own the relationship and provide differentiated experiences to those businesses. Then, because of that, they're moving towards marketplaces where they have more deterministic attribution. All of the brands are moving to marketplaces where switching costs for the consumer are lower. And so these brands have to outcompete each other and become more competitive. Overall, the whole picture is, one, I think on marketplaces, it's becoming better for the consumers, better for their pocket, but it's becoming much harder for brands. And that's kind of what we're seeing playing out.
Yeah. So going back to that though, I think because the original question around community, because I think that you hit on a really important point there, because all the brands that we work with, for context, and this podcast in general is about exploring passionate brand communities and how they were built. And so I think it's an interesting thing to think, hey, these brands are now having to go into these marketplaces because that's what consumers want. They want simplicity, ease of use. They want lower costs, right? So how as a brand do you navigate, yes, I need to go where the money is, but also B, I need to also keep in mind that community is now more important than ever because that's the only way I'm differentiating. So how do brands do that? How are they navigating that? Or is that something that you're helping them with?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you have to be really attuned to your customer and like provide good experiences for them. It's not, it's nothing crazy. I'll give you an example. Like with Jolie, that's a filtered shower head. It's like a commodity, arguably. There's like a ton of other ones on Amazon, but these guys grew 0 to 26 million in 18 months because they're starting with community. They're starting with conversation. They're getting in the conversation. They ran, a ton of out-of-home campaigns that were just really thoughtful. And it was all about like, do you know how dirty your shower water is? Do you know how bad it is for your skin? Just creating conversation. And I give a lot of credit to Ryan and Arjun, the founders, because they just put in the effort. They did things that didn't scale. They leaned into friction. They host a ton of dinner parties. They host a ton of Jolie collaborations out in the Hamptons over the summer. And yes, they've got the baseline revenue channels lined up. like Meta and Amazon that are driving revenue for them. But like the reason someone's seeing their product and choosing to buy it over someone else is because they've invested in brand awareness and they have a strong community who is pushing the conversation forward. So think of marketing and like good community-based marketing as like just having network effects built into your product. If I acquire a customer and they like what I'm doing and they're willing to share the recommendation to their friends, that's the KPI. That creates a network effects. That's what gets them to buy your product over someone else's when they see it on a marketplace. And that's going like above and beyond just getting the right reviews and getting onto the distribution channels and like making sure your branding looks good and like having a good product. That's the layer further where you can really unlock scale for your business.
With that being said, I mean, it sounds like a lot of it starts with just having an incredible product, and I think that's a recurring theme with any of the businesses that we've talked to. Start with the product, make it something that people want to share, and let that community build around it. But outside of the product, what can brands be doing? I know you mentioned dinners as one, but what's something else they can be doing? Like, what are some ideas that you've been helping them implement to really build on top of that product layer? Because that's sort of just the beginning, right?
Yeah, we think about growth stacking. Like this is the concept we talk about a lot at the agency, where you want to make sure you are in the right distribution channels where people are shopping for your products. If you're a direct to consumer brand, that means having your own website. Maybe it means getting listed on Amazon, depending on the type of product that you have. And then it's creating a funnel that can convert customers. But then I think after you have that like well oiled, you need to think about the extra layers that are going to be super accretive. And that's where you need to be thinking that like, okay, I need to lean into some sort of friction. Meta is like a very low friction platform. Like I can get up and advertise on Meta relatively easily. I just need ads, a website, and like I'm good to go. Right. And that's why everyone's on that platform advertising. That's why it's super saturated. That's also why it's high scale. And you can drive, throughput there at high volumes. But like, I think depending on who your customer is, you need to figure out how you can get in their ear with smart communications in channels that your competitors are not on. So high friction. This is something John O'Schaffler from In-House talks about a lot. A company that we invested in. He gave a talk at one of our events a couple weeks ago. So this was his thesis, not mine. But leaning into high friction channels. An example is one of our former clients, Brunt Workwear. They do boots and apparel for blue collar workers, and they launched a podcast like as a direct consumer brand, like really early on as a sales channel. Like, and they were like, why are you doing that? And it became a top 1% Spotify podcast, and looking at attribution was driving a ton of awareness because people wanted to listen to what Eric, the CEO, had to say and was talking about. And that's just because he was like, knew exactly what his customer wanted to hear and, could grab their attention in different ways. So you don't need to be so product or sales focused in marketing anymore. Anything can go. And that's why you see creators introducing products, because they command attention, they have audience, and then, they use that as an opportunity to introduce a product.
Yeah, we earlier this morning we talked to Open Fortune, who does fortune cookie advertising. So I feel like there's another example of where probably competitors aren't going, thinking outside the box on how to create connection where maybe initially connection didn't exist, which I thought was super interesting talking to them. Outside of you mentioned the boot brand. What's the name of that brand?
Brunt Workwear.
Brunt Workwear. So outside of them, are there any other examples you can think of that are top of mind of brands that do a really excellent job of this?
Jolie's a really good example of like doing things that don't scale, and like the dinners are a great example, and they have like crazy density in New York City because of that. Like, you talk about Jolie, people are like, oh, I've heard of that. What other showerhead brand have you heard of? So I think that's another really good example. The other one is, one of our clients too, laundry sauce. They do like laundry pods that smell really, really good. And their advertising is just like fun. It's fun to be around, and it stimulates conversation too, where people talk about it. They love the product. So that's just an example of like matching good product with great marketing, and like, having good results because of that.
So many times I hear, our platform is really built to kind of cultivate community. The way that we work is we typically go in a brand and find out who are the top 15 to 20% of super fans in your brand, and then give them a place to live and to give them benefits, give them events, right? And sort of build out that community layer for them. So many times, though, I hear from brands, they might not necessarily understand the ROI of something like community, because it can be tough, as you mentioned, right? The community can be so many different things. It can be just the propensity to choose a brand over another, but how do you quantify those things? I think is very challenging for me as someone who's trying to take the product to market. How do you think about quantifying community, and measuring it, as someone who cares deeply about metrics and ROI?
Yeah. So, I mean, when we talk about metrics, like we look at customer behaviors, like transactional behaviors. So there are a lot of other leading indicators that could tell you how strong your community is if you're looking at like the retention program, for instance. Like, so what I care about is like, I care about sales, I care about revenue. So an indicator of like strong product, strong loyalty is like repeat purchase rate, and how often customers are coming back to buy the product. Some of that just has to do like inherently with the business plan. So if I was starting a consumer product, I would make sure that it's something that people use every day. Um, and because of that, there's some sort of subscription element. The two brands that we talked about, Jolie, you use your shower every day. I mean, if you have good hygiene, but hopefully. And so you need to replace a filter. And so you have great repeat purchase mechanics built into that business. Brunt Workwear, major beachhead customer was construction workers. They're using their boots every single day. They knew that if you weren't buying a pair of boots every 8 months, you didn't like the product. So that was the barometer for understanding how good they were doing with their product and how loyal the customer was to the brand. That's what I think really matters. Now, if you look at leading indicators for like how good your content is, how engaged people are with what you're doing, that's like engagement. So Bandit Running, we just had Tim at one of our events, and we're close to him. You know, they're the highest engaged running brand right now. They're based out of Brooklyn. They've got a tremendous community in New York City. They do tons of runs. I know for a fact that Tim's looking at his Instagram engagement and saying, wow, we have 20,000 followers, but on every post we're getting 10,000 interactions, 5,000 interactions. Like, we have an engaged community. So that's something that he's looking at. There are a variety of other ones. I think there's no one. I think every brand is different depending on where they're playing, and how they're communicating. And so, it varies brand to brand. For me, like with Darkroom, I'm looking at like how many recurring people are coming to our events, and are they drawing value from it? What is our engagement like on LinkedIn? That's how I'm looking at our community.
With that being said, so it sounds like you guys, not just the brands you're working with, but you guys are yourselves employing some of these different strategies, as far as community goes. You mentioned dinners. Can you talk a little bit more about what you guys as a brand have been doing to cultivate sort of that sense of community?
Yeah, we build Darkroom. Like, we think of ourselves as a consumer brand because we work with consumer brands. We have a level of taste that, needs to reflect the type of businesses that we work with. But yeah, I mean, we do tons of events. We do a dinner series that's pretty intimate. Jake's been to one of our events, actually. We did a suicide sommelier, which was super fun. We do those in different cities around the world. We have an event series called Night School, where like highly tactical marketing conversations. We do another monthly series with Shopify called Office Hours, which is like panel-based AMA. for entrepreneurs. And then we have a university where we're educating the next generation of B2C marketers. So that those are all parts of our community, and content is the major value driver of that.
Yeah, I think there's some similarities there too with some of the brands that we've worked with that have really passionate communities. I think there's an element of moving beyond the product, or for you guys, right? Your core product is the service, the agency service, but how can you turn that core product into an experience? How can you build in layers of experience on top of that product? And I think that's really where, at least for the brands that we've worked with that have done a really good job with community, it's more than a t-shirt. It's more than a vaping system. It's more than a golf club. It's all of these experiences that come with that golf club, the sense of community, the shared interest, the tournaments around the country, right? Like that's where I'm seeing, at least for me, e-commerce moving from, much more product focused, which is still super important, but now how can we create experiences that live on top of that product, the product being the key to unlocking a variety of different experiences led by the brand.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. What's your take on ecom, like just from your perspective and the seat that you guys have?
Yeah, I think I've been in this space for a while. I think being at Klaviyo was really helpful to understanding e-commerce in general because we had such a massive exposure to it. I was talking to, during the peak of COVID, Klaviyo was exploding. I was talking to 10 brands a day. So I was able to sort of get a pulse on the market at all times with Klaviyo. Like we knew when sales were dipping at Klaviyo that the market was dipping. So there was that sense. It was almost like when I was at HubSpot, I could kind of get a pulse for how the small to medium sized business market was looking. I think the biggest thing that I've realized pre-COVID, COVID, post-COVID is sort of it's sort of like you mentioned it, right? There's kind of this like lagging kind of system where you go to wherever there's less competition. So before COVID, everybody was on Amazon, everybody was selling it, and brands were like, okay, I can't compete with this. Also, they're taking my products and repurposing them as their own products. So then you started to see this D2C digital transformation shift, and now everybody's moving online. Also, this could be a different conversation, as I know you invest in brands, but we saw this money flooding into direct-to-consumer brands and just pumping that machine and trying to sell. And the demand just kept skyrocketing because I think COVID really generated a lot of that demand. And then as e-commerce became super saturated, I mean, Shopify blew up. They've got 3 million logos on Shopify. Then it was like, okay, well now everybody's online and now it's even harder to compete. So then it was like, what's next? And so then I think you get into a lot of like the experience stuff, like how are you creating a moat, whether that's with partnerships. I think that's something we haven't necessarily talked about. But I think that sense of creating a marketplace between brands that have shared interests, I think we're starting to see that a lot with, for example, one of our customers, Malbin, collaborating with Nike, collaborating with Topgolf, creating these sort of ecosystems of value for their customers that transcend beyond the product as a way to differentiate. And so that's kind of leading us back into the marketplace. So that's what I mean when I kind of see that sort of you're chasing around where the competition isn't. And so now we're getting back into marketplaces again, and maybe we see that cycle continue. But that's kind of what I've seen as far as e-commerce goes. And I do think, generally speaking, there's been much more of a priority on building sustainable businesses as opposed to, hey, I sell a mattress, right? That's it. It's hard for me to build a sustainable revenue model from that versus some of the brands you're talking about, working boots that will need to be replaced, shower heads that need to be replaced, dropping, product every season, building a subscription sort of offering or service offering on top of products, I think is as well a big trend that I expect to continue to see.
How has adoption been on the Nifty Bridge side?
It's been slow, but the customers we do have see a lot of value from it. I think the problem when it comes to building out these programs, so we call them ownership programs, but they're essentially just taking your top 15% of your customers and building a membership around them. I think one of the challenging parts for brands is that it is not a point and click solution in the sense that I know you've probably heard of like some loyalty program, point programs, for example. We're not a points program, but there are programs where you just turn on and that's it. You let it run, customers sign up, they get points, they spend points. And we don't necessarily believe that drives loyalty to the brand itself. We think it drives a lot more transactional loyalty to the points instead of to the brand. And so we take a much different approach where these programs need to be cultivated authentically, and they require time and they require commitment. And for a lot of brands, now some brands get it. The brands that we work with have extremely passionate communities and they understand the value of that. But sometimes if you go to a brand that doesn't have a super passionate community, they're thinking, well, why would I spend all this time creating this really authentic community and experiences around it when I can just spend that much money pumping it into other places that I know will drive revenue from a traditional model? So that's been the missing, the difficult part for me. And I'm also not probably great at selling it. But I think conversations like this, right, exactly what we're having, helps shape this idea that, hey, my customers can actually be not an endpoint, but they can be sort of this catalyst for growth. Like one of my customers could become a sales rep that gets more customers. And I think that sort of fundamental shift from moving from customers as a byproduct to customers as sort of this salesperson is becoming more and more popular now that people see the power of that.
Yeah, I definitely can agree with you on that. I think brands are just there's a lot of confusion in terms of where they need to be allocating capital to have returns. And this is where I just feel like it's going back to the gut of the marketer to be able to just make strong decisions based on instinct. So if that's the customer loyalty program that you're talking about and it's going to work for the type of products that the brand sells, then they're a good customer for you, right? But I think most people in the marketing seat right now are still confused with where they should be allocating capital because it's not as easy to see ROI and to measure it.
Yeah, what are your? I'm just super curious on your thoughts around point programs. If you've seen it, in what cases does it work well? Are there cases where it doesn't work well? Would love to get your opinion on all things points.
Yeah, I think it needs to be simple. Like the simpler the offer and the program, the better. Just because consumers like just don't have a lot of time. This is like I think the number one thing in marketing is just being simple with the communication. Whether that's like your acquisition campaigns or your referral program and your points program. Yeah, I've seen it executed really, really well in certain instances. And then I think for other brands, it's just like we need to do loyalty because other brands are doing loyalty, and there's no thought behind it. So yeah, I think it can work. I mean, I just checked out Nifty Bridge. I like the way that you're thinking about ownership and providing more value for customers digitally. I think that's really cool. It's something that it's one of the directions I believe and want to see commerce headed.
Yeah, I think we were really fortunate to get in front of some kind of pioneering brands early on that tested this hypothesis for us and were able to help us build out our product. Because originally when we were doing this sort of mentality of, hey, actually, I think there's this fundamental shift that we're seeing with a lot of the brands that we've seen have success, where it's always about how can I get customer lifetime value? And that's sort of the North Star for all e-commerce businesses is, how do I make this relationship last? How do I keep them coming back? And I feel like there's sometimes missing this sort of other element where it's like, what is the company lifetime value? Or what am I bringing from a company to you as the end consumer to make you want to come back? And that shift in thinking, I think, is really important to know because that's where we're heading. It's not just good enough to say, hey, this is a great product. It's what can you get from this product? How can you engage with other people who love these types of products? What is the experience around the product? And that's where we've seen brands skyrocket because they've kind of figured that out, where it's this mutual relationship of growth. And when you do that, when you meet the customer where they're at, they're happy to shout, your name at the top of their lungs. They're happy to post about it because they feel that sense of, pride in what you're doing.
Yeah. I was for a second there, I was like so excited about the direction that NFTs were going to take commerce. And then just that whole market just fell apart. But yeah, digital collectibles would have been really cool for retention programs. Just think like commerce, like the marketer was trying to force that. because like I think there is an overlap between like marketing and Web3, but like the end consumer is still like not where it needs to be to get digital collectibles.
I think that to get that, where I still am super bullish on digital assets tied to Web3 platforms. I do think that it's farther away than I initially thought. 2 years ago when I started the company, I had envisioned a world where brands sold physical and digital products alongside each other really seamlessly. I do think that the experiential, the platforms where these products can be used are not there yet. So it's hard to convince somebody of, hey, here's a collectible. But the reality is the things you can do with it are limited. We've been working on building out these different experiences, tying it into things like video games, Roblox, Fortnite, partnerships with other brands. That stuff is coming. It's still a ways away. And so we've tried to focus on not the technology. We've tried to focus on what are the experiences that we can cultivate that are new and unique. In the future, I do think it will come back around in some way or another. I just think the market was pushing it way too hard. There was way too much money coming in. And then there was, of course, bad players that were like, hey, I can get $100 million if I sell this like thing and put my name on it. And next thing you know, people realized there was nothing really behind the door. It was just a collectible that didn't really do much. So necessary growth, but I think that I still am very bullish on the idea that you can have a digital asset that can communicate with other platforms and experiences.
Yeah, for sure. I want to integrate those experiences into client retention programs. I think they're really valuable. The rails just need to be more established.
Yep, totally. Well, we're working on it. We'll have to stay updated. Let me ask you this. So I know we're coming up on the end here. I wanted to ask you the top 3 events that you recommend every e-commerce founder or marketer should be at in the next year.
Top 3 events. I'm not the right person to ask because I'm so bad. I only go to my own events.
You can list your events. I mean, feel free to shamelessly plug your events as well.
Yeah, I think if you're in New York City, you should follow Darkroom, and like we do a ton of programming, and it's all value based, and everything's on YouTube as well. I have a lot of respect for my friend and industry colleague Nick Shackelford. He does great events in Geek Out and GeekX now. I've been to those. Those are the 2 that I'd recommend.
Awesome. Any good books? Rapid fire here. Sorry.
I just read Dedicated by Pete Davis. I highly recommend it for anyone who's like building and like dedicating themselves to a profession or a startup. Like, read that book. It also helps on the sales side and like forming meaningful relationships with prospects. So Dedicated for sure.
Well, Lucas, honestly, thank you so much for giving us some time on a Friday. I know you've got another one of these things right after, so hopefully I didn't wear you down too much. But man, really just super excited about some of the insight you've given us about the future of e-commerce. And I'm personally excited to kind of incorporate some of this into storytelling because I think you've done a really great job at explaining some of these concepts that might seem a little bit scary. So we appreciate your time. If you want to end with just where people can get in touch with you, and then we'll close it out.
Yeah, for sure. LinkedIn, probably the best place to find me. Darkroom Lucas on LinkedIn, or Lucas DiPietrantonio. That's the full last name. I write pretty frequently on LinkedIn. So that's probably the best place to find me.
Awesome. All right.
All right, Jared. Thanks so much. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.